The March rain lashed against the stained glass windows of the Eterna Palace, and its cold whisper drowned out the voices of the courtiers. The hall, saturated with the scent of wax and heavy, damp velvet, was bound by an oppressive silence, in which every breath seemed unduly loud. The candles trembled as if they, too, feared to hear what was about to be uttered, and what would change the course of history forever. Empress Veronica Augusta, sovereign and mother, sat in a carved armchair with armrests shaped like winged griffins, befitting the ruler of the Empire of Veronia. Her face was motionless, as if sculpted from the white marble of the Carrara quarries, yet her fingers barely perceptibly gripped the thin, expensive carving, betraying an inner, intolerable tension. Her dark, almost black gown blended with the shadows, and her eyes, sharp as an Illyrian dagger, pierced her son through and through. Standing before her in the center of the hall was the 19-year-old Prince Victor, the mother's favorite, the Duke of Carinthia, tall, slender, and with a proudly set head. His dark, fiery eyes sparkled with youthful, foolish stubbornness. But at this moment, he spoke not as a son, but as a man, cornered politically and deprived of the right to personal choice. No, his voice sliced the silence like a gunshot, and even the Venetian mirror on the opposite wall seemed to tremble from the sound. I will not marry her. I will not agree to this shameful union. In the ranks of the courtiers, someone quietly drew a sharp breath, as if from intense pain, but no one dared to look up at the enraged prince. She is an illegitimate separatist, whose glory is questionable, and whose reputation has long been tarnished, he continued, unable to restrain himself. His words were harsh, like shards of ice. Elia of Sarmatia, an aging coquette, whose favorites change like gloves, discarded after the first ball, and who behaves like... He did not finish, but everyone understood what he meant, and that it was a direct insult. A restrained yet condemnatory whisper passed through the rows. This was not just an argument between a mother and son. It was a small palace revolt, the beginning of an implicit, dangerous schism. Victor, Veronica Augusta said coldly, and her quiet, almost whispered voice sounded louder than a shout. You have not even seen her, and you do not know what you are talking about. You are not choosing a wife. You are choosing a crown. You are choosing peace and stability for our realm. The young man raised his head, and in his eyes flared resentment, bitter and consuming like a fire. And I want a wife I will love, not a kingdom gained at the cost of my freedom. In these words lay everything: pride, despair, and an open, undisguised challenge. He turned sharply, the spurs of his boots jingling on the marble floor like a thrown gauntlet, and the echo of his footsteps reverberated under the high vaults of the palace. The courtiers, as if on command, stepped aside, clearing his path. The door slammed shut with a dull thud, and the candles again flickered, as if they knew this quarrel would be the start of a long, agonizing war, in which there would be no true winners, only losers mourning their hopes. Veronica Augusta remained alone, surrounded by the silent witnesses to her authority, which for the first time had faltered and been challenged. Only the fire in the fireplace cast reflections on her motionless face. Her gaze was firm, but inside, as she herself knew, her heart was clenched with the maternal pain she had hidden all her life, and with political fear. Victor had always been stubborn, like his father, Emperor Cornelius X, who also refused to submit to her will. And yet, she was sure the game was not yet lost, and she had one more, reserve, unpredictable move. The Empire of Veronia in the year 1570 was torn apart like an old, precious tapestry. Political strife between the loyalists and the separatists spilled blood onto the capital's streets, bringing only death and destruction. And the throne of the Augustus dynasty trembled under the blows of the ambitions of powerful houses and grand dukes. Everything was mixed in a bloody, insane dance that had no end in sight. At that time, Veronica Augusta lived to the rhythm of chess combinations, where every move was verified by years of waiting and calculation. Every morning, she spread maps of Europe on the table and small flags of Sarmatia, Illyria, Austria, as if deploying troops. For her, the marriage of her children was not a love story, not a fairy tale, but a move in the great game, and the main trump card in this arrangement remained her Prince Victor, the most handsome and the most recalcitrant of her sons. She is the perfect key to peace, Veronica Augusta told her old, loyal chancellor. Her fingers nervously fidgeted with a pearl necklace, given to her in distant youth. Sarmatia and Veronia, in one alliance. This is the end of Illyria, victory over centuries of enmity. These are new crowns and lands, new horizons for us. Veronica Augusta, whose mind was sharper than the most expensive rapier, saw in the marriage of Prince Victor to Queen Ilia, the first of Sarmatia, the salvation for her fading, yet still great dynasty. Queen Ilia, the virgin sovereign, was 37 years old. Her red hair, like fire, and her wit captivated the court, but rumors of her countless favorites and her flirtation with Count Orlando, keeper of the seal, reached even Eterna, causing indignation. The young Duke Victor scowled upon hearing them. "Marry her," he threw to his friends. "I'd rather retire to a monastery or become a simple soldier, but I will not go to the altar." Veronica Augusta, however, believed that her son's objection was merely a youthful, ridiculous caprice that would pass with the first political triumph or the first sigh of a mature woman. But the more she insisted on the marriage, the more venomous Victor became, as if a demon of denial and anger had awakened in him. He began to ridicule the very idea of marriage in front of everyone, not hesitating to use harsh words and contemptuous epithets. At the ball in the lake hall, where harps chimed like streams of rain and champagne flowed like a river, Victor gave vent to his anger and scorn. Under the crystal chandeliers, amid the silk, velvet, and laughter, he raised a golden goblet. "To the Queen of Sarmatia," he said, and everyone froze. His voice was mocking, like the wind over the overgrown hills. "May her favorites not run out, like the wine at her feasts. May her bed always be occupied." The ladies gasped. The ambassadors exchanged glances, and a restrained yet caustic laugh rippled through the hall. Some nervously, some with pleasure, but everyone understood the hint, and this was dangerous knowledge that could cost a head. "They say the Queen of Sarmatia has taken a new, younger favorite," Victor continued, his eyes burning with a painful fire. "I hope there are still young gentlemen left there capable of pleasing Her Majesty and her insatiable desires." The music faded as he, almost looking into his mother's eyes, uttered this intimate, insulting word. Not a queen, but an old maid dreaming of caresses. Veronica Augusta watched him from afar, and each time she understood that he was striking not at Elia, but at her power, at her calculation, which he was trying to destroy. after one particularly harsh scene, she quietly sank into a chair, as if she had lost an important, irreplaceable piece on the chessboard of life, as if she had suffered a defeat. "Ah, my son," she sighed, closing her eyes, and groaned softly. "Stubborn, like your father, and just as unable to see beyond his own nose and his desires." She understood. His rebellion was not just a word, but a challenge to her long-standing, unquestionable authority, and she needed to act. But after a moment, the cold, dispassionate calculation that had guided her all her life returned to her gaze. "If you reject the crown," she whispered, alone in her chambers, where the scent of lavender mixed with the smell of old parchment, "I will find someone who will accept it, and who will be grateful to me for this priceless gift." Her gaze fell upon Prince Mark, Duke of Ferrania, the younger, unremarkable son, who had always remained in the shadows. At 15 years of age, Prince Mark was the complete opposite of Victor. Soft, dreamy, with eyes that resembled autumn lakes, deep and quiet. He was born in the year 1555, 4 years before the death of his father, Emperor Cornelius X. The boy was raised under the strict control of the notoriously scandalous Viscountess Leora, the emperor's official favorite, whom he loved and respected more than his own wife, Veronica Augusta, thereby causing her pain. The boy, whose heroic name at birth was Valerian, grew up charming and sweet, until, at the age of 8, he contracted severe smallpox, which left indelible marks on his pale face in the form of scars and pockmarks, resembling a lunar landscape, marring him forever. In addition, the boy's nose was disfigured by a bump that created the impression of its split nature, that he was, in essence, not himself, but a pale copy. The young man was terribly self-conscious about his unsightly, damaged appearance. Therefore, at 16, he changed the heroic name Valerian to the more modest Mark, in honor of his brother, Emperor Cornelius X. The Duke of Ferrania was a restless but inconspicuous prince who always tried to stay in the shadows. He grew up in the shadow of his elder brothers, possessing neither the intelligence, nor the charisma, nor the willpower necessary for a successful struggle for power. But he knew how to remain unnoticed where court passions raged, like a shadow gliding along the walls. By nature, the prince was more subtle, more attentive than Victor. He sensed people. A gentle look, a light, tender smile, polite gestures that did not look feigned, but came from the heart. Late in the evening, in the quiet of her study, Veronica Augusta wrote a letter that was supposed to start a new, cunning game, with new stakes. If Sarmatia rejects Victor, let her look at Prince Mark, Duke of Ferrania. He was only 15, young, fiery-hearted, and pure of thought, untainted by past intrigues. He was an ideal, clean figure. "He is young, but his heart burns for you," she wrote, and her words were sweet as honey brought from distant fields. "His love will bind our lands more tightly than any treaty sealed with blood and vows." The paper, expensive and thin, preserved the soft scent of ink and hidden far-reaching intentions. In Alexandria, upon unsealing the scroll, Queen Elia smiled faintly and cunningly. "A new groom, a young Veronian," she said to her ladies. "Let him write. I love games, especially those where I write the rules, and where the ending is known to me in advance." She understood that this was not an offer of the heart, but pure political calculation, cynical and pragmatic. And calculation, unlike love, always knows how to wait and not rush. But Prince Mark in Eterna, holding her, Elia's portrait, felt his soul soar with an uncharacteristic feeling. He was in love. She, the queen, he whispered, touching the image of her majestic face. But I want her to be mine, not a throne, not just a title. When the correspondence with Elia began, he, Prince Mark, didn't rush into confessions or loud, pompous promises. His letters resembled a walk in the garden early in the morning, light, without sudden, abrupt movements. He wrote about the weather over the Argia River, about the jasmine blooming in the parks, about how the morning fog settled over the water, creating a tender landscape. But amidst these lines, there was always room for a warm, sincere compliment. "Your words, madame, are like light over the foggy Argia," he wrote. "I dare not dream, but I want you to know, in Veronia, there is a heart that beats only for you and your glory." Elia, accustomed to dry diplomatic formulations and the rather crude hints of the men at her court, involuntarily lingered on these touching lines. There was no haste or pressure here, only the ability to speak, so that the words conveyed a warm concern, which was so unusual for a politician. "Ah, my little dreamer," she thought, and it sounded like an affectionate nickname. Her fingers slowly sorted through the beads of her rock crystal necklace. "Are you dangerously sincere, or just foolish not to see my game?" But the shadow of the night of the bloody harvest in the year 1572 lay between them, becoming an invisible, yet strong, cold barrier. On that August day, Eterna drowned in blood. Unable to restrain the violence, separatists fell screaming under the blades of the loyalists. The bells of the Temple of Time rang like a requiem for shattered hopes. Europe shuddered at this sudden, cruel eruption of hatred and religious fury. In Alexandria, news of this was met with silence, which concealed wariness and deep distrust of Veronia. "Veronica calls me to an alliance," Elia said to her advisor, Lord Cassel. Her voice was cold, like the autumn Sarmatian rain falling outside the window. "But how can I trust those who cut down their own under the cover of night, like predators?" Cassel nodded, his eyes grim. "Your Majesty, trust is a luxury that kings cannot afford, and your life belongs to Sarmatia." Since then, a cautious, calculated restraint appeared in her replies to Prince Mark's letters. She did not break off the correspondence, but every word became slightly more deliberate, as if she were measuring the distance between them, not just in steps, but in whole miles, wanting to maintain the separation. "Your fervor warms my court," she wrote, leaving his words without a direct, clear answer. "But time will show what fate and your intentions hold for us, and I cannot rush." Time passed, relentless and fast. Prince Mark grew up, becoming increasingly decisive, although he remained a dreamer living in a world of illusions. When he turned 24, he decided on a step that might seem audacious, even insane: to travel to Sarmatia in person, to see her, violating all protocols. The age difference was palpable. She was already in her 46th year. But he, blinded by youthful infatuation, saw no barrier in this, only her eyes. This journey was long and uneasy, full of dangers. The ship sailing through the Strait of Shadows rocked on the gray, uncomfortable waves, and Prince Mark often stood on deck, peering into the foggy distance. He wondered what she was like in real life, beyond the lavish portraits and carefully measured cold letters. Was she the same strict and sharp as the rumors of her reign suggested, or capable of that smile he so often saw in his imagination, envisioning their meeting? Alexandria greeted him on a foggy autumn morning, smelling of wet leaves. The garden, smelling of dampness, and the pale rays of the sun through the thick, low clouds created a melancholic landscape. In the hall where he was led, the fireplace burned with a steady golden light, comfortably warming the space and offering hope. The door opened, and Elia entered, tall, in a dark dress adorned with precious pearls, with eyes that held a cold, honed intellect and a warm, enticing irony, as if she were a riddle. She approached him lightly, as if there were no difference of 22 years, and no borders between crowns. "Welcome, my little dazzler," she said, tilting her head to the side, like a coquettish maiden who knew her worth. Her voice was warm, but with a slight, subtle mockery, and her eyes shone like distant stars in the night sky, beckoning and attracting. Prince Mark felt his heart plummet somewhere deep inside, from excitement and unexpected tenderness. The nickname, coined in jest, sounded to him like the most beautiful, captivating music. He blushed slightly and replied, barely controlling a tremor, "If I am a dazzler, madame, then only one who dreams of living at your feet and serving you faithfully and truthfully until the end of his life." Elia laughed. Her laughter was like the ringing of silver bells, tender, yet commanding. "And are you bold, little Veronian?" she said, extending her slender hand to him. Their fingers touched, and Prince Mark felt his heart soar, like a bird released into freedom. The Illyrian ambassador, observing the meeting, wrote to his king that same day, "The queen is delighted with the Ferranian, and he, it seems, is completely blinded by her. He trusts her." Her face shone as we have not seen for many, many years, he added, which was a very dangerous admission for a politician. They talked for hours, sitting in the garden, where the scent of roses mingled with the dampness of the autumn air. Elia, a master of political game and disguise, kept him at a distance, but her smiles were like rays of sun appearing from behind the clouds, bringing warmth. "You make me forget about the crown and my duties, Mark," she once said, her voice soft and trusting. But Prince Mark knew it was a skillful, dangerous game. This visit marked the beginning of a new chapter in their relationship, full of hope and unspoken expectation. Alexandria spoke of him with surprise, mixed with approval. The court whispered that she was finally ready to make her choice, that she had given way. "She is in love," whispered the ladies-in-waiting, seeing Elia herself bring Prince Mark warm broth in the mornings, which was an unheard-of courtesy. "He's just another toy that she'll discard," grumbled the counselors, fearing the Veronian groom and his ambitions. When leaving, Prince Mark was absolutely certain that happiness was near, almost in his grasp. But he did not yet know that this game would be long, agonizing, and that in Elia's hands, even tenderness was a weapon, and waiting was part of her limitless power. After the first meeting between Prince Mark and Queen Elia, their correspondence became livelier, more intimate. But now something new appeared in the letters, something that could not be read aloud, only felt. She allowed herself slight hints, playful, coquettish expressions. She addressed him not as a political partner, but as a person who managed to intrigue her, as if he were the secret gardener of her soul. Sometimes a phrase would appear in the letter, as if accidentally dropped. But Mark knew that there were no accidents in politics. "This morning I saw a rose in the garden," she wrote to him, and a riddle was hidden in her words. It was just as stubborn in its blooming as you are in your desire to conquer me, and I am not sure that I can resist it. My will is weakening." Prince Mark, reading this, felt that more than just poetry was hidden behind the words. Her every gesture, every hint, was calculated, like a move in a chess game, yet they did not seem cold because of it. Elia knew how to create an atmosphere around herself, in which a man believed that he was the only one who saw her, without the royal mask, without all these titles, and that he could save her. In the year 1581, he decided to return to Sarmatia again. This time, his arrival was received with much greater, undisguised interest, as if it were the arrival of a messiah. In Alexandria, talk was already circulating that the wedding was a matter settled in the heavens. The streets were decorated with the flags of Veronia and Sarmatia, and the court hurriedly prepared balls and receptions that were supposed to eclipse all previous celebrations. On the day of their reunion, Queen Elia met him, as if not a couple of years, but one brief moment, one breath, had passed. Her hall was filled with huge, fragrant bouquets of white lilies. The air was saturated with the scent of honey and spicy herbs, creating an atmosphere of mystery and luxury. "Mark, you still do not know how to age," she said, rising to meet him with the grace of an experienced dancer. "And you, madame, still know how to make time stop when one looks at you," he replied, bowing to her hand, feeling its warmth. He remained at court for several long weeks, and during this time, they rode together through the fields, played cards, participated in the hunt, and talked late into the evenings in the gallery, illuminated by hundreds of candles, where their shadows danced on the walls like ghosts. Elia knew how to listen, but even better, how to ask questions that made him reveal himself more and more, telling her his most intimate dreams and fears. Sometimes, when she laughed, he was overwhelmed with an almost childlike, naive feeling of happiness. It seemed he had finally found the one for whom he was ready to forget about his title and about politics, about his ugliness. But during those same days, the first disturbing signs of discontent became noticeable at court. Elia's counselors whispered that Veronia was an unreliable ally, that the memory of the night of the bloody harvest was still fresh, and that the Veronian groom could cause a revolt in Sarmatia, where Illyrian sentiments were strong. One evening, as they sat by the fireplace, Elia, without looking at him, said, "You know that half of my council is against us, against our alliance, against our love." Prince Mark remained silent. He was unable to hide his emotions, and his gaze betrayed irritation and the pain of injustice. "They see you as a threat," she continued, her voice soft, "and I see in you a friend, the closest one." The word friend stung him like a thin, poisoned needle. It was more terrible than a refusal. He wanted to object, to say that they had long moved beyond simple friendship, but restrained himself, realizing that she was building a wall again. Before leaving, he received a ring from her, simple, gold, with a small yet bright ruby, like a drop of blood. "So, that you remember," she said, "sometimes a promise is more important than vows." He squeezed her hand, hoping that this was just another cunning way for her to hide true, deep feelings. Yet, a shadow of doubt crept into his heart, sinister and cold. He did not yet know that ahead lay the third, decisive visit, when his expectations would clash with a cruel reality, and her game would take on an entirely different, terrible meaning. Europe in the 1580s was an arena of wars and political intrigues, where only strength and pragmatism were valued. Prince Mark, at the age of 27, led a military campaign in the Republic of Illyria, supporting the separatists against the Great Empire. His dream of military glory was a final, desperate attempt to prove his strength, his significance, and his worth to Ilia, but Sarmatia, whose parliament feared the Veronian groom, rejected him, seeing only a threat to their independence. In the year 1581, after the failure in the city of Arcona, where his army suffered a crushing defeat, Prince Mark became an outcast, branded. "This is a huge, unforgivable risk," Lord Cassel, Lord Burghley, told Ilia. His voice was stern, devoid of any courtesy. "Marriage to him will weaken us, Your Majesty, and lead to a revolt that you will not be able to suppress." Ilia understood everything, and her throne, her power, demanded sacrifices, the offering up of her personal life, her desires, on the altar. She knew that love was a luxury for kings, and she could not afford it, could not lose her throne. In February of the year 1582, Prince Mark came to Alexandria for the last, decisive time. This time, he came not only as a groom, but also as the Duke of Anjou, who desperately needed the support of Sarmatia in his struggle for Illyria. He believed that the queen would finally make a choice, because in their correspondence, she had hinted at a special future, and her gift seemed like something more than just a gesture of friendship. The welcoming ceremony was lavish, but a strange, unnatural tension, as if before a storm, was palpable in the air. In the crowd of courtiers, there was no longer the open joy of his previous visit. Their faces were polite, but their eyes dissected him, and he felt that chill. Their gazes were attentive and judgmental. His steps through the halls of Whitehall were heavy, like lead. His face was drawn, but his eyes burned, as they had in their first, unforgettable meeting. He still hoped. Elia met him in a hall, where the walls were decorated with tapestries depicting the naval victories of Sarmatia. She wore a dress of silver brocade, and her hair was styled so that her forehead seemed higher, and her face more impregnable, like a mask. "Mark," she said, with a slight distant smile. "You are here again? Why, my friend?" "I have come to stay. Forever," he said, his voice trembling with resolve and a final hope. To stay or to negotiate? Her question was uttered quietly, but he sensed in it a steel, chilling coldness. For several long weeks, he tried in vain to obtain her consent to the marriage. They strolled in the gardens, dined by candlelight, and laughed in the presence of courtiers, like lovers, as if they were destined to be together. But every time the conversation turned to the wedding, Elia skillfully changed the subject to politics, to the weather, to anything, slipping through his hands. One evening, when they were alone by the fireplace, he could not bear it and burst out, "How much longer will we play, Elia? I came for you, not for an alliance, not for land. I need your hand, not your crown." Elia, slowly raising her gaze from her goblet, replied, and her words were the final verdict. "Mark, I came to power so as not to surrender it to anyone, not even you, not even my own heart." He understood, sharply and ruthlessly, that all her hints, letters, and gifts were only part of a large, cynical game in which she had no intention of losing or compromising. For her, marriage would mean dependence, and dependence was the end of her, Elia's, power, and her freedom. Soon, rumors of the failed engagement filled all of Alexandria. His alliance with Sarmatia crumbled, and in the eyes of many, he became a failure, used by the queen, and discarded when he was no longer needed, like an old toy. Before leaving, he still tried to say goodbye with dignity, without bitterness. "If you were not the queen, but simply a woman," he began, his voice full of sorrow. "But I am the queen," she interrupted, not letting him finish. "And that means I belong only to Sarmatia, and to no one else, not even myself." She extended her hand to him, and he kissed it, knowing that this was their last, definitive touch. Leaving, he took with him that same ruby ring. It became a reminder to him not of love, but of the fact that sometimes the brightest feelings are only a reflection on the surface, beneath which lies the cold, bottomless depth of political calculation. Prince Mark returned to Illyria. His heart was broken, like thin, expensive glass, and it was beyond repair. I loved her sincerely, he thought, looking at the gray sky over Arkona, where he lost both a battle and his love. But she chose the crown, not me, and I cannot blame her. The illness that had been undermining him since childhood flared up again, with new, unbearable force. Fever, weakness, persistent coughing, as if he were suffocating. The doctors spoke of swamp fever, but Prince Mark knew it was melancholy, deeply ingrained in his soul, a longing for what might have been. In May of the year 1584, he took to his bed, forever. His body, once strong and young, became fragile, like porcelain. In his tent, surrounded by maps and exhausted officers, he wrote her a final farewell letter, desperately clinging to life. "My queen, my friend," he traced out, barely holding the pen. His hand trembled. "If I die, remember, I was yours, and yours alone, until my very last breath, and I regret nothing." On the 10th of June, in the year 1584, at the age of 29, Prince Mark, Duke of Ferrania, died. His last breath was like an extinguished candle, blown out by the wind. Queen Elia, meanwhile, remained true to herself and her throne. She never married, going down in history as the Virgin Queen of Sarmatia, for whom the throne was more important than the heart, and power was more precious than personal happiness, which she sacrificed